Hi, this is Paul, and this is Rough Draft for Sunday, and this is the current edition of my Sunday sermon. If you have input, I'd love to read your comments. It's awfully wonderful to sort of put out a rough draft of a sermon before I actually have to preach it, even though a great many more people tend to see the rough draft than see the sermon. But I do change it between now and Sunday. We want the world saved. We are anxious about our lives. We're anxious about the future. We're anxious about the future of those we care about. And we want better and not worse. Now, I love this quote from Tom Holland from a couple of years ago now that he made on a podcast talking about his book Dominion. Imagine you've got to write a story in which for the first time somebody who suffers the excruciating death of a slave is going to be cast as being in some way part of the Creator God, who's fashioned everything, and he's got to be convincing not just to people now, but for 2,000 years and across the whole span of the world. It's a really astonishing thing to have pulled off as a literary feat, and that 4 people did it is amazing. And again, as I've mentioned many times, the thing that those 4 people had in common was not some finishing school or some university. It was the man that they wrote about. Now, the question that a lot of people have is, can this story apply to me? Was Jesus real? What do we mean by real? Is he available to me? Is he, in fact, for me? Does he have the power? Is he good? Can I be saved? Well, what do you mean by saved? Saved from what? Saved from everything I need to be saved from. Last week we saw Jesus call some of his disciples. The first thing Andrew did was to find his brother Simon. Andrew was a disciple of John the Baptist, and tell him, "We have found the Messiah," that is, the Christ. Messiah in Hebrew, Christ in Greek. Now, this was understood as the one sent by Israel's God to rescue Israel from the unchosen people who had been enslaving, oppressing, exploiting, and destroying God's chosen people. Now, don't you want to, this is basically what Andrew was saying to his brother, don't you want to participate in this rescue, in this restoration? Could there be any better way to spend your life? So Philip found Nathanael. Each person finds another, because what better way is there to spend your life? We have found the one Moses wrote about in the law, about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. Nazareth? Can anything good come from there? Nathanael asked. Come and see, said Philip. And that's the posture. Come and see. Now, John chapter 2, remember that the chapters were not put in there by the author. The chapter numbers and verses were added a great deal later. So there's continuity from the end of chapter 1. Jesus said, "You believe because I told you I saw you under the fig tree. You will see greater things than that." Well, on the third day, a wedding took place in Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. Now, a lot of commenters stop and say, well, on the third day from what? Well, Jesus had been up in the Galilee. But many will notice that third day has a lot of resonance symbolically in the gospel. There's a lot of people believe that Nathanael was from Cana himself, so he was perhaps visiting Nathanael. In village life and hospitality, you get invited to things. These are small communities, and increasingly Jesus was the object of a lot of attention. Could very well have been a cousin or something, because Jesus' mother was there and there's family members there, but this was a time and a place without Costco. So in order to put on a wedding, it's actually a pretty major production to accumulate all of the food and all of the wine and everything necessary to actually hold a celebration worthy of something like a wedding, because weddings are very important things. They're unions of families, and they're times of beginning. They're full of potential. And what happened was the wine was gone. Were there too many people? Was there not enough Costco? When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now, many careful readers of the Bible have noted that the Bible is sparse. It gives you just the words you need to have. The wine is gone. This is a crisis. One of the things that you notice in Jesus' parables about wedding banquet is that the wedding must be filled. If we're going to have a celebration that's connected to the importance of the occasion, this is a catastrophe. And perhaps, again, it's a relative. And so Mary, the mother of Jesus, feels it. So she goes to her son and says, "There's no more wine." And her son says, "Why do you involve me in this? This is not my problem. My hour has not yet come." And we're going to have to talk about what that means. And I love his mother saying, "Do whatever he tells you." Now, God glories in extravagance. One of the things when I moved to California, the house that I moved into had 2 fruit trees in the backyard, one plum tree and one orange tree. And what I noted right away, having grown up in a city where there was no fruit tree in my backyard, all the fruit comes in at once. There's no way we could eat all of the fruit from that plum tree or that orange tree. And so you try to, in fact, give the fruit away. And because so many people in Sacramento do have fruit trees in their backyards, it's even difficult to give it all away often. God glories in extravagance, and Jesus accepts. Jesus is very much like this. He accepted the ointment, the expensive ointment that was placed upon his feet. Judas says, "Oh, the money should be given to the poor." And Jesus says, "No, the glory and the abundance of earth is here for a reason." It's God's way to celebrate with extravagance. It's one way to realize glory. That's what a feast is. Drink until you can drink no more. Eat until you can eat no more. Because what we're doing here is of vital importance. In a recent interview with the Babylon Bee, Elon Musk understood very well. And one of the few things he remembered from his Sunday school days about Christianity was, what's that about? Jesus making wine for people who had already been drinking for a number of days. God must love parties. Yes, in fact, he does. My hour has not yet come, Jesus says. This is not his crisis, but he knows his crisis is coming. It is not his wedding, but he knows it is coming too. Now, what's amazing is that his mother knows his heart. He is kind and sympathetic to our needs and our desires, and he is generous and will inconvenience himself for our well-being. Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by Jews for ceremonial washing. Now, the ceremonial washing was not about COVID. It was not about germs. This was reinforcing Israel's special election, her special place in God's mission to rescue the world and to rescue herself from the kinds of pagan occupation that she suffered. They're not all physical. They're not all military. Sometimes they're cultural. And so that's what those ceremonial washing jars are. And it's a lot of water. It's a lot of water. 6 jars, 20 to 30 gallons each. You're looking at 120 to 180 gallons. Jesus was the anointed one. She was elect from the world. That's what the washing is about, separation. But she was also elect for the world. Each of those jars holding 20 to 30 gallons, Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." So they did. Now notice how obedient the servants are. Does this make any sense? Doesn't matter. Follow the master. Do what he says. Trust in him. Good servants / slaves, it's the same word in Greek, will obey their master. They have an insider participation, a view of his glory that the guests will not have. This is exactly why the disciples started following him. They wanted to participate. They wanted to see it from the inside. It didn't matter if it took their time and their livelihoods and their lives. This was more important than all of the other ways to spend their life. They did so at the risk of their welfare. Faith is required. Can you imagine the servant bringing to the master of the feast a bowl of water for hand washing and saying, "Why don't you drink this?" If the miracle doesn't happen, the slave might get beaten. And the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. The servants get the insider information. They get to participate. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best until now." And even little boy Elon in his Anglican church learned a lesson that much older boy Elon, now Tony Stark of the West, remembers. What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Now, that language of the NIV is not really appropriate to the Greek. Really, what the Greek says is that they had faith into him. And I've put this diagram before. These are all the 17 New Testament proper prepositions. Ice plus ice there is into. They believed into him. What does that mean? Well, they start out thinking about him as master, having their own conceptualization of what Messiah will do, but now they trust in him personally. He will now begin to redefine their assumptions of exactly who he is and how he will save. So they begin a journey of transformation. Yes, they imagine that the Messiah is one that God will use to rescue Israel from the unchosen people who have been enslaving, oppressing, exploiting, and destroying her. He is going to rescue Israel, but not in the way they expect. Israel's election is for the world, as well as from the world. Now, the story is told with the background of other stories behind it. This is a story of a marriage. God's bride, is Israel, his chosen one. This is a story about wine and glory and celebration. As I said, God is extravagant. Why would he make grapes so that if you ferment them, they could become wine, which brings delight to the heart and joy to the lips, in moderation, for many? It's a story of a marriage that, in fact, went wrong. It's a story of a business venture that went wrong. And you can find one of many tellings of that story in the book of Isaiah. I will sing a song for the one I love, a song about his vineyard. My loved one had a vineyard on a fertile hillside. He dug it up and cleared it of stones and planted in it the choicest vines. Now remember, this wasn't just for vines. He built a watchtower in it and cut a wine press as well. Then he looked for a crop of good grapes, but it yielded only bad fruit. He wanted wine. He wanted celebration. He wanted glory. But something went wrong. Now you dwellers in Jerusalem and people of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more could I have done for my vineyard than what I have done for it? When I looked for good grapes, why did it yield only bad? Now I will tell you what I am going to do to my vineyard. I will take away its hedge, and it will be destroyed. I will break down its wall, and it will be trampled. I will make it a wasteland, neither pruned nor cultivated, and briars and thorns will grow there. I will command the clouds not to rain on it. The vineyard of the Lord Almighty is the nation of Israel, and the people of Judah are the vines he delighted in. He looked for justice, but saw bloodshed, for righteousness, but heard cries of distress. What does Israel need to be saved from? We have found the Messiah. Well, She certainly needs to be saved from the Romans. But what do the Romans need to be saved from? The vineyard of the Lord Almighty is the nation of Israel, and the people of Judah are the vines he delighted in. He looked for justice, but saw bloodshed, for righteousness, but heard cries of distress. My hour has not yet come, Jesus says to his mother. His hour will come. His wine, blood, will be poured out. His crisis will come. This will be a moment of crisis for him when his hour comes, just as it was a moment of crisis for the bridegroom and the wedding. It will also become a moment of glory. But can this story apply to me? Was Jesus real? Is he available to me? Is he there for me? Does he have the power? Is he good? Can I be saved? Be saved from exactly what? What do I need to be saved from? Jesus says, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. Well, you saw the servants there. They filled the ceremonial washing jars. They took the risk. They handed it to the steward, and the steward says, this is great. They didn't get beaten for handing him wash water. Servants and slaves filled the jars and anxiously brought the washing water to the master of the ceremonies. What is he telling you to do? What is he asking you to commit to? What risks must you take? They were privy to the glory the blissful, ignorant guests were unaware of. They were just drinking the wine. The servants, and then his disciples, saw his glory, and they began to believe into him. Come and see. The invitation is still there.